Welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Kathryn Peterson here with my co-host, Michael Regan. And today we're going to talk about a timely topic. So how to stop that turnover that tends to happen at this time of the year, depending on the industry that you're in. So how to keep your mortgage team happy and engaged. And with that, I'm going to bring in Michael. Thanks for being here as always.
Happy to do it. Happy to talk about it. You are right. This does seem like that time of year where the housing industry, whether you're on the real estate side or the mortgage lending side, has this experience. And for those of our listeners who are entrepreneurial business owners, you'll grab some nuggets from this. Don't think of this as a real estate topic or a mortgage lending topic. It's really about recruiting, retention, and turnover within the framework of a small team. So yeah, really excited to dig into it with you, Kathryn. Let's kick off and look, I guess I'll ask you the first question because this is an important factor for your team, just like it is many of the listeners. How do you get here? Why is this an important topic for you with your team? Why do we care about retention?
So first, retention is time, retention is money. It's, really stability is a competitive advantage. If people know that you have a consistent team, that's going to build trust. Plus, think about when you have to hire and fire and recruit somebody, how long that takes and how behind you can get on customer service and all the projects that you wanted to do because all of a sudden now you're spending all of your time interviewing and hiring somebody.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when I'm working with clients, this is a factor that most of them recognize at a macro level, but it's really hard to count the cost. Meaning they're
Yeah.
aware of the fact that it's time and money, but they don't know how much time and they don't know how much money.
Yeah.
It's nebulous. It's really difficult. If I can really get them to slow down enough to account for that, it's incredible the amount of time it takes to find really great talent and get them to agree to join you and get them to get on board
Mhm.
successfully and get them to hit the ground running and then forget about the longevity question. I mean, now you've got them on the other side and you're going to build a great career together. Those are all really difficult things to do. And so, yeah, when you say time, money, all without a doubt, and quantifying it, maybe that's the hardest part. But
Mhm.
let's talk about some of the reasons why people do struggle with wanting to stay, and let's talk about maybe the flip side of it. Why it's sometimes hard for us to make a break from someone, even though we might know we need to. But start with the first one. Why is it? Why is it so difficult for us? And maybe you've got a personal experience, or maybe you've seen it within the framework of some of the organizations you've worked with. Why is it so hard?
I think it's hard for people to stay if they're not, I think there's certain drivers. So let's say if they don't feel trusted or safe in their position, is this company going to go away? Is this team going to go away? Are we not going to produce? Where can I feel heard, secure, supported, and part of a team? And I think that sometimes once we get them on board, we're so proud of ourselves for getting them on board that you forget that that's just step one of 200 and there's still a lot of work to be done. Because I think a lot of people kind of get that little jolts of energy once you recruit somebody or once you find a great hire. And I think it becomes a little bit about that hunt for people and they forget that, yeah, you got this new loan officer who's awesome, but then if you don't do anything to keep them, what was the point of that?
Yeah, it really is a true statement. I think what you're describing is what many call psychological safety. And I think that's more
Yeah.
than likely the main reason that people struggle both on both sides of the
Mhm.
coin, whether it's struggle to stay or struggle to figure out how to keep someone. It's not being willing to look at the safety issue as you described it. Do I feel heard? Do I feel known? Do they care about me? A lot of those things have been more important to organizations maybe since COVID than they were before. But that doesn't mean we have it all figured out. It might mean it
Mhm.
could even be more challenging now than ever because now we're aware that those are real issues, but not all organizations know how to manage their people with those thoughts in mind. What are
Mhm.
some things, if you're talking to a leader out there, if someone listening is leading large groups of people, what are some things that you've seen work really well to create that psychological safety within the framework of a team or an organization? Give me an example if you can think of one.
So one could be, let's say during COVID, that was a standout time for people or a time of failure. Because if leaders were going out and saying, hey, everything's okay, we figured out these markets, we're doing this, we're doing that to make sure that we're ahead of the curve, we're figuring out e-closings, we're doing all these things to make your job easier, or at least we're aware of the issue, that always makes people feel like, okay, we're going to get through this together versus if it's radio silent and people are having to come up with those things individually, that can certainly increase the stress. So that's a kind of a little bit of an extreme example, but we were probably all here during that time. So it's, I think, a good example for the two different ways that you can handle that situation.
All right. Well, let me add a couple more then, so that we can
Yeah.
expand the frame for our audience. I also think when a leader, and in my mind, we've talked about this on previous episodes. You might have a manager title if you're listening today, and I want to challenge you as a manager that your opportunity to lead is not the same thing as your title as a manager. You really do have an opportunity to demonstrate great personal or self leadership that pours over into your influence with your team. And if you do, a couple things really help. One is having a really clear vision of the future for this team. If people have a really strong sense of who we are, what we belong to, why it matters, there's some mission and purpose in the mix. This is more than just a paycheck. We're doing this for a reason. If they know where we're going, they don't have to know all the details. Vision isn't about a really clear, detailed roadmap, but it's definitely a compass. It's definitely telling us what direction are we going. Those things matter when people feel connected to their culture and they belong to something. They're clear on who we're becoming, and they're excited to build something together. I think that helps build some safety within the
Yeah.
topic of reducing turnover, because that's really the theme of our podcast today. How do we stop the turnover? How do we engage our teammates and make them more happy? So leaders, be clear on your vision. And here's an old phrase that never gets old to me. You'll know you're talking about your vision often enough when you're sick of hearing yourself talk about it. I mean, you just can't do it enough. So I think that's a big one. Another one that's very common, but maybe not well executed, are having regular one-on-one meetings. Anytime we can engage in one-on-one meetings with our teammates, the opportunity is there to be seen and heard and understood. Our old friends in the military, especially I think the Marine Corps in particular, are fond of the hooah chant. You've probably heard them yell that out. And when they do, what they're acknowledging with their commanding officer is you are heard, understood, and acknowledged. That's hooah. And I think that's true for our teammates as well. They want to feel heard, understood, and acknowledged. So that's the other one, is give them an opportunity, give them a venue. The one-on-one meetings are great. And
Mhm.
if you're going to do them, don't popcorn them, have them scheduled. Try to be consistent with them. Don't cancel them on a whim. Like, make them really intentional, and try not to turn them into tactical, like pipeline update meetings. Turn them into real questions about the individual that you're working with, and make sure they feel heard, understood, and acknowledged. All right. Well, that's a couple of those. Kathryn, any others you want to add to the mix?
I think the other piece is just recognition. That's the one that I struggle with a lot, is saying, hey, good job on this. Hey, good job on that. Because a lot of times, like for me, I don't need that from my management at all. But there's a lot of people that do need that, and that aren't necessarily able to self-recognize, and they need to hear that. And Todd will always ask me, hey, have you told your team good job? And I'm like, oh, I need to do that again. So I think that's an important retention tool that a lot of times can get missed.
I love this topic, Kathryn, because this is one that we talk about all the time. And, at Building Champions, we are, 30-year certified users of the DISC assessment tool for behavioral style and for communication style. And one thing we've learned is, and Todd is not wrong, acknowledging your team is super important, but understanding the way in which each individual receives that recognition is a game
Mhm.
changer. I'm not saying that you have to become a psychologist, but if you
Yep.
can just recognize the way in which, some people need that verbal um, uh,
Mhm.
acknowledgement, but some of them want it in front of everybody and others
Mhm.
want it very privately. Like, pull them
Mhm.
aside in the coffee room and tell them, "Hey, just so you know, I see what you're doing. I love it. Thank you." In other words, both are verbal, but some love the recognition, high eyes, love that
Right.
recognition in front of the room, high S. Please don't embarrass me in
Right.
front of the room. Tell
Don't
me
stand.
in tell me in private. C's and D's, on the other hand, the verbal isn't as important to them. You know what really matters to them is they want some different version of recognition, like promote their idea. Like, hey, this you put this idea on the table. We're gonna take a run with it. We're gonna give it a try. That is super acknowledging to a high D or a high
Mhm.
C. And again, the difference there is probably the audience. The D wants you to know it was his idea. The C would rather you just do it. And later, everybody is like, that was such a good idea. Whose idea was that? They're okay. They don't need the spotlight, but they want to know that you gave their idea a shot. So just a little tip on that, because I love
Mhm.
your recognition comment, but different styles work. So there's a little leadership hack for those of you out there who are looking for different ways to communicate with different styles. And you know your people. You know the difference between the ones who need that public accolade or that private accolade. They need the personal acknowledgement, or they need more of the, hey, I love what you're doing. Let's use that idea. You'll know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those are great tips, and I need to implement them more in my own team, so it's always nice to hear.
All of us do. All of us do.
Yeah. I also really liked a question. You could do this in the one-on-one or anytime really is what support do you need? And I
Yeah.
love that question.
Yeah, I think there are many leaders who are good at versions of this, and I remember
Mhm.
when I got to Building Champions, Daniel Harkavy would regularly pop by my office and he'd literally, he'd use a version of that and say, "Hey, is there anything I can do to help you accomplish
Mhm.
whatever that was, whatever you're doing?" It feels so valuable to know that a leader, someone who doesn't need to pop by your office and do that, acknowledge that. And what do you think the answer is? 8 times out of 10, most
Oh,
of the
yeah.
time it's, yeah, I'm good. Thank you. I'll let you know. Like I think leaders or managers maybe don't ask a question like, what support do you need? Because they're a little nervous that someone's, oh, glad you asked. I've got a list here. The truth is that's rare. But here's the reality. If that does happen, own it, because that means it already existed before you asked the question. I mean, if someone literally has the list for you and they're like, "Oh, glad you asked," and they unpack it, it means it was already an active thought. And the sooner you address it, the better. So I love that question, Kathryn. Great call. What support do you need? And I guess that flows with, is there anything I could help remove from your plate? Because sometimes you have um, people who maybe don't know what they need, but phrasing it that way
Mhm.
helps them say, well, I do have this thing that I can't figure out. Yeah. Is that something you can help me with? Here's the
Mhm.
only trick though. Harvard Business Review, gosh, probably 20 years ago, had such a great article. I may have shared this with you, and I believe I'm going to paraphrase it. Someone out there listening is going to correct me in the show notes. I believe the name of the article was "It's Not My Monkey." And the article was all about in corporate business, it's very common for, anything I can do to remove your plate from your plate turns into, why, as a matter of fact, there is. And then boom, they dump something back to the
Mhm.
manager. And the manager has to get really good at acknowledging that I'm here to help you figure out how to do your job better. I'm not
Mhm.
here to do your job for you. I'm not here to take this from you. I'm here to help you. So if there's anything I can clarify or remove from your plate gets asked, make sure that the implication is I'm going to take it from you. Maybe remove is we need to figure out who else should be doing
Yeah.
this and where else to delegate it. So there's again another little hack. It's not my monkey. Go find it on Google. It's a great Harvard Business Review article.
Yeah, that sounds good. I always think not my monkey, not my circus. is the quote that I've used.
Well,
So,
I think I've used a version of that. If you hang out with clowns, you'll end up at the circus.
mm, yeah, look at all these variations of the same. We could write our own Harvard Business Review one.
Maybe, maybe.
So, one thing that isn't on here too, but I think is really important to ask teammates is where are you at percentage wise? Are you at
Mm.
50% busy, 100%, 150%? Because it can give me an idea. Do I have someone on my team that's bored and they want more to do? And if you have a job that you're bored, you leave. I do at least. But if you're at 150%, you can't operate that way for very long or you're going to totally burn out. So it just gives me a good gauge of how someone's feeling, regardless of what I think I'm putting on their plate. It's how are they feeling with what's on their plate?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, that reminds me, in the medical field, medical professionals are really good at, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your discomfort today? Well, it's a very
Mhm.
subjective answer, meaning if I say 5 or I say 7, well, your 5 might be my 7. So it's subjective, but what it does do is it gets the conversation going, and we get to maybe dig into the question behind the question and maybe the real topic that we need to discuss. So yeah, I like that approach too. Catherine, I think about the name of our podcast. Our podcast is titled Building Bigger Lives. And we picked that title for a reason because we wanted professionals, entrepreneurial professionals in particular, to grab topics that we're bringing to them to help, develop a vision for a bigger life. And bigger doesn't always mean more. Sometimes bigger means less. Sometimes bigger means
Mhm.
deeper and wider, not necessarily further and faster. Everybody's got a different definition of bigger. But when we can help our teammates define their vision for a bigger life, not just their business goals, but the whole picture. I mean, as a coach, that's when it gets really exciting for me is thinking about, hey, how can I help this person transform from whoever they are when I met them to someone down the road who's living this bigger life, so that maybe someday I meet their spouse and their spouse says, hey, I don't really know what coaching is. I don't even know what you guys talk about. All I know is my wife is a better mom, friend, and spouse than she's ever been, or a better husband than he's ever been. Like, that's a win for me. So I really think that's another key to stopping turnover
Mhm.
is when we help people create clarity around a bigger and better version for their life, suddenly their attachment to you as the leader is really strong because now you're a
Mhm.
person helping them on that journey. Just like when we talked to our friend John Donnelly, he talked about the porter, the person that helped him, get to the top of Kilimanjaro. We as leaders become the porter in the lives of these people that we get to lead. That's a that's, I don't know, pretty great responsibility, but also a pretty great opportunity.
And nothing shows caring like asking about people's goals and then making sure that they hit those goals. That's like leadership love right there. And if someone doesn't really care about your goals, you may not really want to stay there and work with them. So I think that
Yeah.
that's it, because then are you just working for the leader's goals and not your own goals? Well, there's other people involved in this group. So I think it's really important to go through how are they building a bigger life for themselves. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
You just said something that is really timely, at least in the time that we're recording this. Here we are coming into the end of 2025. I'm not sure when someone might be hearing this. Maybe they'll hear this early in 2026. But when you think about this time of year, most folks are thinking through some version of planning. On the personal side, they're thinking about,
Mhm.
family plans. What are we doing this year? Some of that may involve finances. Some of that may involve family dynamics. Some of that may involve, fun things like a vacation we're planning, something like that. But we've got these thoughts and dreams. But on the business side, we've also, you just touched on it. We've got organizations in which there are expectations around our performance, and sometimes those goals are very specific to, the budget that we're setting and the hiring we're going to do and the tools that we are going to acquire or the resources we're going to invest in. So it's important, and I'm not going to minimize the any of that. But here's the point in the context of turnover. So when you are going through the planning process with someone and you remind them that, hey, I'm just as interested in you in your goals and your dreams and looking for ways in which they fit within the organizational goals and mission and purpose. When we can help someone connect the dots with those, they become part of the fabric of our culture. Now they're not just an employee, they're part of the team. Sometimes we hear businesses use the word family, and I'm always a little iffy on that one because sometimes it gets
Hmm.
overused. And,
Yeah.
last I checked, it's not a good idea to fire people in your family. Like, that's not a real life scenario you want to play out. Not saying it doesn't need to happen. I'm just saying it's hard. Um, but but I think the reason on the positive side that some organizations develop a culture that feels like that is there is that strong connection between I
Hmm.
want to help this organization accomplish what it's doing because at the very same time I feel the organization cares about the things that matter to me. We're working
Hmm.
in a symbiotic harmony. Gosh, you want to solve the retention problem at your organization. That's really the next level is when we are winning, the organization is winning and the individuals are winning. That's a sticky culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to let this episode go by without bringing up the leader's role in the process. Like you
Mhm.
have to do what you're gonna say. So like if you're holding your team accountable, you also have to hold yourself accountable and show that you're making goals and you're doing your planning and you're doing that kind of stuff. I think that sometimes when you have a disingenuous leader, that can be difficult, especially when they're holding you to a really high standard and they may not be holding themselves to that high standard. And I think that that's just an
Yeah.
important thing that I've seen some people leave over.
I'm glad we're going to finish there because that's often where things start at building champions. It's part of what I was attracted to as a client 20 years ago, and part of what made me want to join the organization as a teammate back in 2013, which, wow, that's a long time already. I'm just realizing. Kathryn, I think the continuum looks like this: personal leadership always precedes team leadership. If I can get that through my thick as a brick skull, that if I'm not leading myself well, I can't legitimately lead my team well. Now I can try, but you're exactly right. My team will sniff that out in minutes if they feel like, well, he talks a good game about sales, but he doesn't do the things that he talks about. He talks a good game about some version of work-life balance, but that guy is a workaholic, or the opposite. We never see him at the office. Something's amiss. Or, how about the guy who says he cares a lot about your goals and dreams? He cares a lot about your family, your husband, your girls, all these things. But this guy's on his third marriage, second heart attack, and just wrapped up a good bankruptcy. Look, I'm not saying real life doesn't happen to people, but when leaders struggle to lead their own lives, it's really hard to get people to want to connect with them. Now, here's the caveat, because I am also a believer in the redemption story on every level. Some leaders, the most valuable part of their story is their ability to have learned from their failure, come back from it, and be incredibly, incredibly empathetic and real. That sometimes is maybe the most powerful story. So don't ever walk away from today's episode thinking we've said, hey, if you're a leader, you got to lead your life perfectly. We all walk on feet of clay. But if you do experience difficulty or failure along the way, own it. Your team will thank you for it when they see your humility and your ability to step in and say, I effed that up and I have to own that. That's on me. And when a leader steps in with that level of vulnerability, gosh, it's pretty hard to imagine people don't want to be a part of that because then they see themselves. They look in the mirror and they're like, I get that person. I know that
Mhm.
feeling. I've messed up too, and somebody gave me a second chance. So look, lead yourself well for sure. But if a failure is part of your story, own it. Don't run from it. Don't bury it. Don't hide it. Own it and watch how people are drawn to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I kind of feel like that's a great place to end. So, with
Yeah.
that, we talked about, hey, how do we keep these great people that we've recruited? Let's not have turnover if we can help it. It's going to happen, but let's do what we can to keep those great people. Michael, any other thoughts before I close this one out?
Well, look, turnover is going to happen. So let's just make sure that everybody knows that the purpose of today's episode is not to eliminate it because, people have their own lives and they do funky things for reasons we'll never totally understand. But if you could think about some of the things we've shared today and decide, I'm going to try to do some things differently in the year ahead, I think your ability to experience greater retention, which, by the way, I've yet to meet a person who wants to be retained, but I understand the term. We have organizations that need to retain their talented people. And guess what? If you'll try a few of these things that Kathryn and I shared with you today, I'm pretty confident that you can improve greatly in stopping the turnover within your organization. And I hope if you do, you'll share our episode with someone else who might want to hear some of the things that we shared as well.
Thanks, Michael. All right, thanks for joining us today on Building Bigger Lives. You can find us on all the platforms. Please share, please listen, please watch, and thank you so much for your time and listening to Michael and I today.